The sun was shining brightly over the capital city of Albion Prime, the most important planet in the new British Empire. The sky was clear and blue, and the streets were full of tourists from many different planets. Some were tall and furry, others had tentacles, and a few looked like walking crystals. But they all had one thing in common. They wanted to see the famous human royal guards. The royal guards stood outside the imperial palace in red coats, shiny boots, and tall black hats. They didn't move. They didn't talk. They didn't blink. Some people even said they didn't breathe. That part wasn't true, of course. But they were well known for standing still like statues, no matter what happened around them. A large group of alien tourists had just landed nearby. They were excited, chatting in many different languages. One of them was named Cortec. He was big, green, and covered in a hard shell that made him look like a moving tank. He had 4 arms, a strong jaw, and a loud voice. On his home planet, strength was everything. If you were strong, people respected you. If you made others laugh or cry, you were seen as powerful. Cortec had heard about the royal guards from videos online. He watched clips like aliens try to make guard laugh and royal guard versus tourist pranks. He thought it was all for fun. In his mind, the guards were just part of the show. He didn't understand that for humans, the guards were more than that. They were a symbol of honor and discipline. "I'm going to break this one," Cortec said to his friends. "Watch me. He won't last 5 minutes." His friends laughed and pulled out their recording devices. They stood in a half circle, ready to film the moment. A few tourists nearby noticed and also stopped to watch. Cortec walked up to one of the royal guards. The guard stood tall and silent, holding a long rifle with a bayonet. His face was calm, and his eyes were hidden behind black shades. He looked like he didn't care about anything happening around him. Cortec started making faces. He wiggled his tongue and made rude noises. Nothing happened. The guard didn't even blink. Then Cortec danced. He spun in circles, clapped his claws, and pretended to trip. Some of the other tourists laughed. The guard still didn't move. Now Cortec was getting annoyed. He walked up closer and started yelling. "Hey, are you asleep? Do you even understand what I'm saying?" The guard didn't respond. Cortec waved a hand in front of the guard's face. No reaction. Cortec's voice became louder. "Come on, say something. Move just a little. You humans think you're so special with your little hats and big rules." Still nothing. Then, Cortec made a big mistake. He raised one of his strong arms and poked the guard in the chest. Hard. It wasn't a soft tap. It was a solid push, enough to move most people back. That was when everything changed. The guard moved. In less than a second, the human stepped forward with perfect form. His arm moved fast and strong. He pulled out a small silver baton from his belt and struck Cortec's arm with a short, sharp motion. A flash of blue light came from the baton, and Cortec dropped to his knees, shouting in surprise and pain. Everyone watching gasped. Cortec's eyes were wide with shock. His arm was numb. He hadn't expected this at all. He looked up at the guard, who was now standing still again, just like before. Calm, silent, unshaken. For the first time that day, Cortec didn't say a word. Cortec sat on the stone ground, holding his arm. His face was twisted in pain and confusion. Just seconds ago, he had felt powerful and brave. Now he felt weak and embarrassed. The guard who had hit him stood still again, just like before. It was as if nothing had happened. The crowd around them was silent. No one laughed now. Some tourists put away their cameras. Others looked at each other with wide eyes. They had come to see something funny, but now they weren't sure what they had seen. A second royal guard stepped forward. This one had darker skin and a calm voice. He looked directly at Cortec, but didn't raise his weapon. "You have broken imperial law," he said. "Touching a royal guard is an offense. You will be fined." Cortec opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to say something clever, but his arm still burned from the electric shock. He didn't understand how a small human could move so fast, or hit so hard. Back on his planet, guards were big, loud, and always ready to fight. But these humans were quiet, still, and somehow scarier. His friends, who had been filming everything, slowly stepped back. One of them whispered, "Maybe we should go." But the second guard raised his hand. "Do not leave," he said. "You are witnesses. This event will be reported." Cortec looked around. People were staring at him from all sides. Tourists, locals, even a few drones in the air, likely recording for official news. He suddenly felt very small, even though he was one of the biggest creatures in the square. 2 patrol drones floated down from the sky. They had smooth white shells and blinking blue lights. They hovered beside Cortec and spoke in a soft voice. Subject identified. Cortec of Goreth 9. Charges: public disorder, assault on royal personnel, disruption of peace. What? Cortec said. "I didn't hurt anyone. It was just a joke." The drones did not answer. They scanned his ID chip and confirmed his identity. Then they played a short video of the event, showing him poking the guard. "I didn't mean to," Cortec tried to explain. The first guard finally spoke, but his voice was not angry. It was calm and cold, like a machine. "Intent does not erase disrespect. You touched the crown." "I touched you," Cortec said, confused. "The guard is the crown," the human said. "We do not move unless ordered, but we defend if attacked." Cortec's head spun. He had come to have fun, maybe post a funny video online. Now he was being treated like a criminal. The crowd slowly began to move again, but people were quieter now. Parents whispered to their children. Some tourists shook their heads. Others looked at the royal guards with new respect, and maybe even a little fear. Cortec was helped to his feet by the drones. His legs felt shaky. His arms still hurt. He didn't look proud anymore. He looked tired, embarrassed, small. A message popped up on his datapad. It was a fine, big enough to ruin his vacation. He would also have to attend a public class on human culture and traditions before he could leave the planet. As the drones led him away, Cortec turned to look at the guard one last time. The man hadn't moved. His face was still hidden behind his glasses, but Cortec could feel the message. This is not a game. For the first time in his life, Cortec understood what discipline looked like, and for the first time, he realized that not all strength comes from muscle. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, or if you'd like a quick recap. Cortec sat in a small room inside the Imperial Palace, feeling more embarrassed than he ever had in his life. The walls were decorated with old Earth artifacts, paintings, weapons, and strange old-fashioned furniture. It was quiet. Too quiet. He felt like an animal in a cage, waiting to be judged. He had been taken from the public square by the drones and escorted here to wait. The royal guard didn't speak much, but the silence was almost worse than being yelled at. His mind raced, and he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He had thought it was just a fun challenge, something silly. He had seen the videos online. Those other aliens who had tried to make the royal guards laugh or move. Most of them didn't succeed, but it was all fun. Right. But now he understood that it wasn't fun at all. These humans weren't like the other species he had met. They were serious. They had rules, and they followed them without question. Cortec had broken one of their most important rules, and the consequences were serious. A door opened, and a human officer walked in. He was tall, wearing a neat black uniform, and carrying a datapad in his hands. The officer's face was kind, but there was a serious look in his eyes. "Cortec of Goreth 9, the officer asked. Cortec stood up and nodded. He had no idea what to expect. He had never been in trouble like this before. His home planet didn't have strict laws like this, and there was no punishment for something as small as poking someone. "Please, sit down," the officer said, pointing to a chair. "I need to talk to you about your actions earlier today." Cortex sat back down, his body still sore from the stun attack. He tried to relax, but the officer's serious tone made him uneasy. The officer sat down across from him and looked at him closely. "We've reviewed the footage," the officer said. "You insulted the Royal Guard, touched one of them, and disrupted the peace. These actions break Imperial conduct codes." "I didn't mean to do anything wrong," Cortex said, his voice low. "It was just a joke. I thought it was funny." The officer nodded. "I understand that. But the Royal Guard is not a joke. The Guards are symbols of our history and honor. They represent Earth's strength and the strength of the Empire. Disrespecting them is not just a personal insult. It's an insult to the entire Empire." Cortex was confused, but they didn't even respond. They didn't say anything. How could I know they cared? The officer looked at him with patience. "That's the point. They don't respond because they don't have to. They are trained to stand still, to remain calm in the face of anything. But that doesn't mean they don't notice what's happening. They see everything, even when they don't react. And when someone crosses the line, they act, swiftly, but without anger." Cortex rubbed his sore arm. The pain was starting to fade, but the shame still lingered. "So, I shouldn't have touched him." "Correct," the officer said. "You may have thought it was harmless, but to us, it was an attack. You broke a boundary, and you learned the consequences." Cortex sat in silence for a moment. His mind was working hard to understand. The officer had been clear, but Cortex was still struggling with the idea. Back on Gorath 9, physical strength was everything. You fought to prove yourself, to show that you were the strongest. Here, strength was in control, in discipline. The Guard had shown him that. "I didn't know," Cortex said finally, looking up at the officer. "I'm sorry." The officer smiled just a little. "I know you didn't, but now you do. And that's why we have the laws. To teach, not just punish." Cortex nodded slowly. He wasn't sure if he completely understood yet, but he knew one thing. He never wanted to feel like this again. He had learned a hard lesson today. He had learned that there was more to strength than just muscle. "I promise, I won't make that mistake again," Cortex said, his voice serious. The officer stood up and extended a hand to Cortex. "Good. You'll be free to leave in a few hours after the final report is processed. But remember this lesson. Respect comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the quietest actions that are the most powerful." Cortex took the officer's hand and shook it. His mind was still full of thoughts, but he felt a small sense of peace. He knew he would go back home with a story to tell, one that wasn't funny, but one that was important. Hours passed, and Cortex finally left the small room in the Imperial Palace. The officer had been kind but firm. Cortex had apologized again, and the officer had explained more about the importance of respect and discipline in human culture. Cortex wasn't sure if he fully understood everything, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never mess with the Royal Guard again. When he stepped outside, the sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow over the city. The streets were still busy with tourists, but now Cortex felt like everyone was watching him. He could see people pointing and whispering as he walked by. His face burned with embarrassment. He walked slowly, looking down at the ground. He was still feeling sore from the shock, but more than that, he felt something else, a deep sense of shame. He had been the cause of all this attention, and it wasn't for anything good. It wasn't the kind of attention he wanted. As Cortex passed the square where he had poked the Royal Guard earlier, he saw a group of tourists standing near the edge of the palace gates. Some of them were looking at the guards with wide eyes, probably still thinking about what had happened. Others were taking pictures, and a few even waved at the guards, as if they were on a sightseeing tour. But Cortex didn't feel like part of the crowd anymore. He felt different. It wasn't just that he had been punished for his actions. It was the realization that he had disrespected something important, something that mattered to the people here. The Royal Guards weren't just a joke. They stood for something much bigger than just tradition. They stood for the power of control, the strength of patience, and the honor of a people who had fought and worked for their place in the stars. As he walked, Kortek thought back to the officer's words. Respect comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the quietest actions that are the most powerful. The thought made Kortek pause. The officer was right. In his home world, if you wanted respect, you had to fight for it. You had to show you were stronger than everyone else. But here, it was different. The guards didn't fight. They didn't need to. They were respected because they had control. They had the strength to stay calm, even when someone like Kortek tried to push them. Kortek sighed and looked up at the sky. The warm orange and pink colors of the sunset made him feel a little better. He realized that maybe he could learn something from the humans after all. Maybe it wasn't about being the strongest. Maybe it was about having the strength to stay calm when everything else was chaotic. He thought about the guards again. They had been so still, so focused. Even when he had pushed them, they didn't get angry. They didn't lose their control. That was true power. It was something Kortek had never considered before, but now he could see it clearly. Kortek walked around the square a few more times, trying to clear his mind. He wasn't sure what to do next, but he knew he had to make things right. The humans had their own way of doing things, and he had to respect that. He didn't need to be the strongest to get respect. He just needed to understand the value of patience, of calmness, and of discipline. As he turned a corner, he saw the two royal guards standing at the gate once more. They were as still as statues, their eyes hidden behind their dark glasses. Kortek stopped in front of them, feeling a little nervous. He remembered how he had poked one of them earlier and how quickly everything had turned serious. But this time, he didn't want to make a joke or cause trouble. He just wanted to show respect. Slowly, he bent down and picked a small flower from the ground. It was a white blossom with soft petals. He carefully walked up to the guard, holding the flower in his forearms. "Thank you," Kortek said quietly, placing the flower at the base of the gate. "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't understand before, but I understand now." The guards didn't move, didn't speak, but Kortek knew they didn't need to. In their silence, they had already given him the greatest lesson he could learn. As Kortek walked away, he felt a small sense of peace. He wasn't sure if he would ever completely understand humans, but he knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the lesson they had taught him that day. The next morning, Kortek woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft pink light over the city of Albion Prime. It was a beautiful sight, and for a moment, Kortek felt a sense of calm. The events from the day before still weighed on him, but he was determined to make things right. He had learned a lesson, one that had shaken his beliefs and forced him to see things differently. As he prepared for the day, Kortek thought about the Royal Guard and how they had handled everything. They hadn't spoken, they hadn't moved, and they hadn't even shown a hint of anger. They had been calm, silent, and in control. And even though they hadn't said a word to him, they had taught him more than anyone ever had. His datapad beeped, and he looked at the screen. There was a message from his friends back on Gorath 9. They had seen the video of him poking the guard and were laughing. The message read, "Kortek, you're famous. Everyone's talking about you. They say you tried to break the guard. How did it feel?" Kortek didn't know how to respond. He had been the joke for so long, but now everything had changed. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be famous for that reason. He wasn't proud of what had happened, but he also didn't want to lie. He thought for a moment, and then typed a reply. "It wasn't funny. I was wrong. I learned that respect is more important than strength." He paused before sending the message, then added, "The Royal Guard showed me that." After sending the message, Kortek left his hotel room and headed to the city square. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew he had to do something to show he had truly changed. As he walked, he saw the same tourists and locals going about their day. The busy streets were filled with people, and the city felt alive. It was a beautiful place, full of history and culture. When he arrived at the palace, he stood at the edge of the square, watching the royal guards once again standing still, like statues. They were perfectly in place, their eyes hidden behind their dark glasses, their rifles at their sides. Kortek took a deep breath. This time, he wasn't going to make a joke or try to challenge them. He knew better now. Instead, he stood there for a long time, just watching. For the first time, he understood what they were doing. They weren't just standing still for show. They were holding themselves to a higher standard. They were choosing to be calm, to remain strong no matter what was happening around them. And that, Kortek realized, was true power. He thought back to the officer who had explained the importance of respect. The officer had been kind, but he had also made it clear that some things were sacred. The royal guards were one of those things. They were not just soldiers or statues. They were symbols of everything humans valued: discipline, honor, and control. Kortek stood there, deep in thought. He had a feeling that this would be the last time he would ever do something like what he had done before. He would never again try to make the guards laugh or move. He now saw them for what they truly were, not a challenge, but a lesson in self-control. After a few more minutes, Kortek took a deep breath and walked closer to the gates of the palace. He stopped just a few feet away from the guards and bowed his head. It wasn't much, but it was the best way he knew to show respect. He didn't need to say anything. The gesture spoke for itself. The guards didn't move, as expected, but Kortek felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was his way of saying, "I understand. I am sorry." As he turned to leave, a small group of tourists approached. They smiled at him, recognizing him from the previous day. Some of them gave him a thumbs up, while others whispered to each other. Kortek smiled back, but this time, he didn't feel embarrassed. He felt like he had finally understood something important, and that made him proud. He didn't need to be the strongest anymore. He didn't need to prove anything. He had learned that the greatest strength came from within, from being able to control yourself and show respect to others. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever. As Kortek walked away from the palace, he felt a sense of calm he had never felt before. He wasn't the same alien who had poked the royal guard the day before. He was different now, and for the first time, he was okay with that. The next few days in Albion Prime felt different for Kortek. He no longer walked the streets with the same carefree attitude he had before. Everywhere he went, he noticed the royal guards standing still in their positions, their faces calm and their postures straight. He couldn't stop thinking about them. They had shown him what true strength was. They had taught him the value of patience and control. Kortek had started visiting the square more often. He didn't go to challenge the guards or make jokes anymore. Instead, he simply watched them. He spent hours observing their stillness, how they never moved no matter what happened around them. He saw tourists come and go, take pictures, and even try to make the guards laugh. But the guards never budged. They remained perfect, silent, and strong. It was hard for Kortek to understand this at first. On his home planet, strength was about force. It was about showing how powerful you were by lifting heavy things, beating opponents, or being the loudest in the room. But the humans, especially the royal guards, showed him that strength didn't always come from physical power. Sometimes, it was the strength to stay calm, to not react, and to remain in control no matter what. One afternoon, as Kortek stood near the palace watching the guards again, a familiar voice called out to him. "Kortek. Hey, Kortek." He turned and saw a group of his friends from Gorath 9 approaching. They were laughing and joking, clearly excited to see him. But as they got closer, their smiles faded when they saw the serious look on Kortek's face. "You okay, buddy?" one of them asked. "You look different." Kortek smiled slightly. "I've been thinking," he said. "A lot." The friends laughed. "Thinking? About what?" "You're the guy who always wanted to challenge everything." "I was wrong," Kortek replied quietly. "I thought strength was about showing how tough you are. But it's not. Strength is about control, about knowing when not to do something. The Royal Guards taught me that." His friends were silent for a moment, not sure how to respond. Kortek didn't mind the silence. He had come to understand that not everything had to be explained. Some lessons were better felt than said. After a while, one of his friends spoke up. "So you're saying the guards don't have to fight to be strong? They just stand there?" "That's exactly it," Kortek said, nodding. "They don't move. They don't react. And that's what makes them powerful." His friends didn't seem entirely convinced, but Kortek could see that they were starting to understand. They had all grown up in a culture where strength was measured by physical feats in battles. But here, in Albion Prime, he had learned that strength was about control, discipline, and respect. As the day went on, Kortek and his friends walked around the city. He noticed that he was no longer as eager to show off or do something to impress people. Instead, he took his time, observing everything around him. The city was beautiful, full of old buildings, green parks, and busy streets. The people here seemed to move with a quiet confidence, just like the guards. By evening, Kortek found himself standing in front of the gates of the palace again, watching the royal guards. This time, he wasn't the tourist who had poked them in the arm. He wasn't the one trying to make a joke or get a reaction. He was simply a visitor, observing the guards with respect. One of his friends, who had followed him to the palace, nudged him. "Are you going to do it again?" he asked, grinning. "No," Kortek replied with a smile. "I've learned my lesson." His friend looked confused. "But why? They don't even do anything." "That's what makes them strong," Kortek said. "They don't need to do anything. They just are strong." His friend didn't say anything for a moment, but Kortek could tell that the message had started to sink in. As the sun began to set, the sky turning dark purple and orange, Kortek felt a sense of peace. He wasn't the same Kortek who had arrived in Albion Prime. He had grown. He had learned something new about himself and about the world. It wasn't just about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about understanding what true power meant. He looked one last time at the royal guards. They hadn't moved. They hadn't reacted to the crowds of tourists or the noise around them. They simply stood, calm and unmoving, their presence enough to command respect. Kortek smiled to himself. He had learned that lesson well. The next morning, Kortek woke up feeling a bit lighter. The past few days had been a learning experience, and he was glad he had taken the time to understand the deeper meaning behind the royal guards' actions. He had spent hours reflecting, watching the guards stand at their posts, unmoving, calm, and composed. There was something deeply powerful about that silence, something Kortek had never noticed before. He had always thought strength came from being loud, being powerful, and being able to show off. But now he knew that true strength often showed itself in silence, in stillness, and in control. After breakfast, Kortek decided to take another walk around the city. He wasn't in a hurry to go back to his hotel. He felt like there was still so much to learn. The streets of Albion Prime were bustling with people from all over the galaxy, and Kortek couldn't help but notice the different kinds of people, their different ways of moving through the world. Some were loud and confident, while others were quiet, reserved, but no less strong in their own way. As he strolled down the street, he saw the usual tourists snapping pictures and chatting excitedly. But today, Kortek was more focused on how people interacted. He began to notice the subtle ways people showed respect to each other. It wasn't just the royal guards who held a certain kind of power. People, in general, seemed to have an inner strength, a quiet confidence that didn't need to be shouted or shown off. Kortek passed a small park and sat on a bench, watching a group of humans practicing some kind of martial art. They were moving in perfect harmony, their movements calm but powerful. The way they moved reminded Cortec of the Royal Guards. It was all about control, about knowing exactly when to act and when to stay still. The martial artists weren't fighting each other. Instead, they were training, learning how to control their own bodies and minds. For the first time, Cortec understood that strength wasn't just about defeating others or showing off. Strength was about discipline, about knowing yourself, and about being in control of your own actions. The humans didn't need to prove anything by being loud or aggressive. Their strength was quiet, and it was something Cortec admired deeply. As he continued to observe the martial artists, Cortec saw a few children running around, playing and laughing. They seemed to be full of energy and joy, their laughter ringing out in the air. But even they, in their play, showed a kind of strength. They were fearless, and they seemed to know that they could be themselves without needing to show off. They were confident in their own way, and Cortec could see that this was the kind of strength that the humans valued most. He smiled to himself, thinking about how much he had changed in such a short time. Only a few days ago, he had been the tourist poking fun at the Royal Guard, not understanding what he was doing. Now he felt like a different person. He felt more at peace with himself, and he realized that true power came from within. He didn't need to fight or prove himself. He didn't need to show that he was the strongest. He just needed to be in control, to respect others, and to understand the world around him. Cortec stood up from the bench, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He was ready to go back to the square and see the guards again. He wasn't going to challenge them. He wasn't going to poke them or try to make them move. He just wanted to stand there and show them the respect they deserved. He wanted to be like them, calm, still, and strong in his own way. When he reached the square, the royal guards were still at their posts. They didn't move, didn't speak, but Cortec didn't need them to. He stood in front of them and bowed his head slightly, a small but meaningful gesture of respect. This time, he felt no need for words. The guards didn't react, but that was exactly the point. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. As Cortec turned to leave, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had learned so much in such a short time. He had learned that strength wasn't always about showing off or being the loudest in the room. It was about control, discipline, and knowing when to act, and when not to act. And now, he felt ready to go home, not as the same tourist who had once poked the Royal Guard, but as someone who understood a little more about what it meant to be truly strong. As the days passed, Cortec's perspective continued to change. He had come to Albion Prime as just another curious tourist, looking for excitement. But now he was leaving with something far more valuable, a new understanding of strength and respect. The lessons he had learned from the Royal Guards and from the people of the city had become a part of him. They weren't just stories he would tell his friends back home. They were truths he had experienced. On his last day in Albion Prime, Cortec decided to take one final walk through the city. He had packed his things and was ready to return to his home world, but he didn't want to leave without fully soaking in the lessons he had learned. The city had been kind to him, offering him a new view of the world that he never thought possible. It was a city that valued quiet strength, discipline, and respect for others. As he walked through the streets, he noticed how different things seemed now. The bustling crowd didn't feel as chaotic. The people moved with purpose, but they also moved with a kind of peace that Cortec had never noticed before. The streets were filled with sounds, people talking, children laughing, and the hum of technology, but none of it felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt harmonious, like the city was alive, but at the same time, calm. Cortec passed by the same park where he had watched the martial artists training. They were still there, practicing their movements with precision. The way they moved was graceful, almost like they were dancing, but Cortec could see the strength in every step. They didn't need to shout or show off. Their power came from within, from their ability to control their bodies and their minds. He smiled as he watched them. The lesson had become clear. Power wasn't about being the loudest. It wasn't about being the strongest in terms of physical strength. True power came from being able to control yourself and remain calm no matter what the world threw at you. The guards, the martial artists, and even the people walking down the street, they all shared that quiet power. It was a power that didn't need to prove itself to anyone. It just was. Kortek took a deep breath and continued his walk. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. He wasn't rushing to get to his destination. He was enjoying the journey, appreciating the calmness of the city and the stillness inside himself. Soon, he arrived at the square in front of the palace. The royal guards were still standing at their posts, as they always did, perfectly still and silent. Kortek stood in front of them, just as he had done before. But this time, he wasn't there to apologize or to make a gesture of respect. He was just there to thank them for teaching him a lesson he would never forget. He stood there for a few moments, watching the guards as they remained unmoving. There was no need for words. Kortek knew that the lesson had already been taught. The guards didn't need to speak, and he didn't need to say anything either. Their presence alone was enough. The lesson was in the stillness, in the calm, in the control. As Kortek turned to leave, he noticed a group of tourists walking up to the gates. They were laughing and chatting excitedly, holding their cameras up to take pictures of the guards. Kortek smiled to himself. He could see the same excitement in their eyes that he had once felt. They were there to have fun, to experience something new, just like he had been. But now, Kortek saw the guards in a different light. They weren't just part of the tourist attraction. They weren't there to entertain or to perform. They were there to teach something deeper, something far more important. They were there to show the true meaning of strength, patience, and respect. As he walked away, Kortek felt a sense of gratitude. He was leaving Albion Prime with a new understanding of the world. He had learned that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about controlling yourself, staying calm in the face of chaos, and respecting the things that were bigger than you. He had come to this city as a tourist, but now he was leaving as someone who had grown. He had learned to appreciate the quiet strength that surrounded him, and he would carry that lesson with him for the rest of his life. Kortek sat in the departure lounge, waiting for his flight back to Gorath 9. His bags were packed, and his ticket was ready. As the time ticked away, he couldn't help but think back to everything that had happened over the past week. He had come to Albion Prime thinking he was just another tourist, looking for some excitement and fun. But now, as he sat in the quiet airport, he realized that this trip had changed him in ways he never expected. He thought about the royal guards. At first, he had seen them as nothing more than statues, part of the city's tourist attractions. He had poked fun at them, tried to make them move, and laughed when they didn't respond. But that was before he understood what they were really about. He had learned that the guards weren't there to entertain anyone. They weren't there to be poked or teased. They were there to show the world something important. True strength wasn't about showing off or being the loudest in the room. True strength was about staying calm, controlling your emotions, and knowing when to act and when to stay still. As he sat there, Kortek realized that the lessons he had learned from the royal guards were lessons that he could carry with him for the rest of his life. He didn't need to prove himself by being the strongest or the most powerful. He didn't need to show off or fight with others. What he needed was the quiet strength to control himself, to remain calm no matter what was happening around him. It wasn't about defeating others. It was about knowing when to act with patience and wisdom. Kortek smiled to himself. He had learned something important, something that would stay with him forever. He had come to Albion Prime looking for excitement, but what he had found was far more valuable. He had found a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. It wasn't just about physical power. It was about inner strength and self-control. He thought about the martial artists he had watched practicing in the park. They were so focused, so calm, and yet they were incredibly strong. They moved with grace and precision, showing that power didn't have to be loud or aggressive. They had taught him that strength came from within, from mastering your body and your mind. Watching them had helped him understand the lesson that the royal guards had shown him. Strength wasn't about fighting. It was about being in control, about choosing when to act and when to stay still. As Cortex sat in the airport, he thought about the people he had met during his stay. The city of Albion Prime was full of kind, respectful people who didn't need to shout to show their strength. The way they carried themselves, the way they moved through life with a quiet confidence, had taught him so much. He had learned that you didn't have to be the loudest or the most powerful to be respected. True strength came from within, and it showed in how you treated others and how you controlled yourself. The announcement for his flight came over the loudspeaker, and Cortex stood up. He walked toward the gate, his steps steady and confident. He wasn't the same Cortex who had arrived in Albion Prime a week ago. He had changed, and he was proud of the person he had become. He had learned that respect, patience, and self-control were the true measures of strength. And now, as he prepared to return home, he knew that he would carry these lessons with him for the rest of his life. As Cortex boarded the shuttle and settled into his seat, he looked out the window one last time at the city of Albion Prime. The sun was setting over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the buildings. He felt a sense of peace as he looked at the city below. He had come here to see the sights and have fun, but he was leaving with something far more valuable. He was leaving with a new understanding of strength, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The shuttle lifted off and soared into the sky. As Cortex watched the city fade away in the distance, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength wasn't about showing off or proving yourself. It was about knowing when to stay calm, when to be still, and when to act with wisdom. And that, Cortex realized, was the greatest power of all.